The Apollo program had overcome its greatest setback, and NASA was now pushing forward at full speed. With Apollo 7 proving that the command and service module could perform flawlessly in Earth's orbit, the next missions would take even bolder steps. The moon was no longer just a distant goal, it was within reach. Apollo 8, 9, and 10 would be the final test before humanity's first steps on another world. Each mission carried immense risks, pushing the boundaries of what had ever been attempted in space. From orbiting the moon for the first time to testing the lunar module in real conditions, these missions would make or break the dream of a moon landing. This is the story of Apollo's final trials, where success was the only option. December 21st, 1968, the countdown for Apollo 8 had finally reached zero.
3, 2, 1, 0.
On this historic day, NASA's Saturn V rocket roared to life, carrying 3 astronauts, Commander Frank Borman, Command Module pilot Jim Lovell, and Lunar Module pilot Bill Anders, on a mission that would forever change space exploration. The goal was clear: orbit the moon and return safely to Earth, testing not only the spacecraft, but also the astronauts' ability to survive in space beyond Earth's protective atmosphere. For months, the crew had trained for this moment, practicing intricate maneuvers and troubleshooting potential issues. They were the first humans to attempt what was once thought impossible: travel to the moon and make a successful return. There was no backup plan if something went wrong. They would either succeed or fail. As the Saturn V launched, it carried with it not just the crew, but the hopes of a nation eager for a step forward in the space race. The flight was intense. As the spacecraft entered the vacuum of space, the crew experienced zero gravity for the first time. Each astronaut had to adjust to the sensation of weightlessness while keeping a sharp focus on their mission. They checked the spacecraft's systems continuously to ensure everything was functioning as it should. Meanwhile, back on Earth, thousands of engineers and scientists monitored the mission, ready to address any issues that arose. December 24th, 1968. After 3 days of travel, Apollo 8 arrived at the moon's orbit. The excitement was palpable as the crew began to make history, becoming the first humans to orbit another celestial body. But this wasn't a smooth and easy ride. As they approached the moon, the crew was tasked with performing critical maneuvers to adjust their orbit, ensuring they wouldn't miss their opportunity to enter lunar orbit. The spacecraft had to be rotated and fired at precise angles. The crew was under immense pressure as they executed these critical adjustments. There were moments of tension as some minor technical glitches occurred, especially with the spacecraft's navigation system. Yet through careful coordination and clear-headed problem solving, the crew managed to stay on track, entering lunar orbit on schedule. As they passed behind the moon out of contact with Earth, the crew experienced the eerie silence of space. For the first time, the astronauts were on the far side of the moon, away from the safety of Earth's communication reach. They were truly venturing into the unknown. As they emerged from behind the moon, they could look out their windows and see Earth, a tiny blue and white sphere in the vastness of space. It was a humbling sight, a moment that would define the mission. While in lunar orbit, the astronauts conducted scientific observations and took photographs of the lunar surface. Some of these images, such as the iconic Earthrise photo, would later become famous worldwide, showing Earth in all its beauty and fragility. The mission had already achieved so much, but the astronauts still had to complete the most challenging part: returning home. December 25th, 1968. After completing 10 lunar orbits, the crew made their way back to Earth. The journey home was smooth, but the tension remained as they prepared for re-entry. The spacecraft had to enter Earth's atmosphere at a specific angle to avoid burning up or missing their landing zone. As the capsule descended through the thickening atmosphere, the astronauts experienced the fiery glow of re-entry. The heat shield, tested earlier in Apollo missions, held up and the crew continued their descent. The splashdown in the Pacific Ocean was a success, and the recovery teams were quickly on hand to retrieve the astronauts. As the hatch opened and the crew stepped out of the capsule, they were met with cheers and applause. Apollo 8 had not only proven the spacecraft's capabilities, but had also solidified humanity's presence in space. March 3rd, 1969, the countdown for Apollo 9 began. On this crucial day, NASA's Saturn IB rocket was ready to launch, carrying 3 astronauts: Commander James McDivitt, Command Module pilot David Scott, and Lunar Module pilot Russell Schweickart, on a mission that would test a critical component for the moon landing: the Lunar Module. The goal was simple but vital: to test the Lunar Module in Earth orbit and prove it was ready for the next step toward landing on the moon. For months, the crew had trained for this moment. They had rehearsed intricate maneuvers, practiced spacewalking, and tested the spacecraft's systems, all to ensure they would succeed in this high-stakes mission. The Lunar Module, or Spider as it was called, had never been flown in space before. It was a new piece of technology that NASA needed to perfect before using it in the final mission to the moon. As the Saturn IB rocket lifted off, the hopes of the space program and indeed the nation were riding on the success of this mission. The flight was an intense challenge. Once in space, the crew separated the Lunar Module from the command module. Gumdrop. Schweikart and McDivitt took control of the Lunar Module while Scott remained in the command module. They tested its systems, including its engines, life support, and navigation, all while performing docking and undocking maneuvers. It was a high-pressure environment as they had to work quickly to test every aspect of the Lunar Module's functionality. Despite some technical glitches, including problems with the Lunar Module's engines, the crew pressed on. Schweikart even conducted a spacewalk, the first by an Apollo astronaut outside the command module, to test the suit and life support systems. The spacewalk was difficult. Schweikart reported feeling disoriented and unwell due to the unfamiliar environment, but the mission proceeded without major incident. The Lunar Module performed well, although there were some issues with its systems. However, these problems were far from catastrophic, and the mission was deemed a success. Apollo 9 proved that the Lunar Module could operate in space, and NASA had gathered the crucial data needed to move forward with the lunar landing plan. March 13, 1969. After 10 days in space, the crew prepared for their return to Earth. The journey home was smooth, and the spacecraft re-entered Earth's atmosphere without major issues. The splashdown in the Atlantic Ocean was successful, and the crew was recovered quickly by NASA's recovery teams. Apollo 9 had achieved its goals. The Lunar Module had been tested successfully. The crew had proven they could perform in space, and NASA had taken another significant step toward the moon. The stage was now set for Apollo 10. May 18, 1969. The countdown for Apollo 10 had begun. On this pivotal day, NASA's Saturn V rocket was poised to launch, carrying the crew of Commander Thomas Stafford, Command Module pilot John Young, and Lunar Module pilot Eugene Cernan on a mission that would take them to the edge of history. The goal was straightforward: complete a full dress rehearsal for the moon landing by flying the Lunar Module to the moon, performing all the steps required for a lunar landing, but without actually landing. The mission was crucial in ensuring that every procedure was tested before Apollo 11 would carry astronauts to the lunar surface. For months, the crew had trained for this moment. They had rehearsed docking and undocking procedures, as well as the Lunar Module's descent to the moon's orbit. The Apollo 10 mission was a key step, testing every maneuver that would be required for Apollo 11.
5, 4, 3, 2, all engines running. Liftoff. We have liftoff, 49 minutes past the hour.
As the Saturn V rocket launched into the sky, the excitement and anticipation were palpable. This was the final step before history would be made. The flight went smoothly. After reaching space, the crew separated the Lunar Module from the command module, and Stafford and Cernan began to work with the Lunar Module, performing critical maneuvers. The plan was to descend within 15.6 kilometers, 9.7 miles of the lunar surface, simulating all the steps needed for a landing. It was an impressive feat to come so close to the moon's surface, but the mission was designed to ensure that everything was prepared for the real landing on Apollo 11. As Stafford and Cernan descended toward the moon, the lunar landscape became visible. However, just before the final descent, they halted the mission as planned, leaving the landing to Apollo 11. The Lunar Module's engine fired, and they returned to the command module, where Young awaited them. The crew had completed all the necessary maneuvers, including the critical docking procedures. They had achieved a historic first, getting closer to the lunar surface than any human had ever been before. Despite some challenges with the Lunar Module's systems, including difficulties with the spacecraft's radar, the crew managed to complete the mission successfully. Stafford, Young, and Cernan had completed the dress rehearsal for Apollo 11 without any major incidents, ensuring that all systems were go for the upcoming moon landing. And that's it for today's episode of the Apollo mission. With Apollo 10, NASA proved that the path to the moon was almost ready for the historic moment. They completed the crucial final rehearsals, ensuring that Apollo 11 would be the first to land humans on the lunar surface. The countdown was on, and the world's eyes were set on what was to come. Thank you for joining us as we journey through the Apollo missions. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next step in this incredible journey. I'll see you in the next one.